Welcome to Very Honored Frater BT's Esoteric podcast, episode 61, in which
Anonymous
interviews me. A frater who prefers to remain
anonymous
asked me for some help memorizing the Qlippothic names attributed to the 10 Sephiroth, as well as the Esoteric Titles, both of which are given in the Practicus grade of the Golden Dawn. I recorded the conversation, went on for a while, and so, without further ado, let's get to that interview, shall we?
Hey, what's up, Frater?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Well, let's see. I've got the Qlippothic right here, so let's start there. Okay. So just to run through how I would, just kind of off the top of my head. Thaumiel. Now, it's interesting that the EL in every case means the E, the yod at the end of a noun makes it first person possessive, and the L, there's no is, and so the is implied between the first-person possessive-ized noun and the word God. Hence, Gavriel means God is my strength, or my strength is God. So, off the top of my head, I don't know the Hebrew word thaum, or what word it is that is being conjugated this way, but it's being translated as the two contending forces. Easy enough to remember, since I think it is, since Keter is ultimate unity. We think of ultimate oneness and unity, Ararita, that kind of thing. Everything coming together in Keter, everything reconciled in Keter. So the opposite of that would be two contending forces. Now, it's interesting because in the Neophyte, we're taught that the sacred symbol of the triangle is the two contending forces with the one reconciling them, which implies that, you could make a leap and say that it implies that the Tree of Life needs the Qlippothic Tree in order to fulfill its own function. There wouldn't be a triangle if there weren't two contending forces to be reconciled. So then, okay, Gogiel, the Hinderers. So, Chokmah ultimately enables everything. It creates everything. It's the mercurial, the sperm of all life, the father of everything, the light that divides into the prism to create everything. So what's the opposite of that? Hindering. So if it's basically, you can kind of learn about the nature of at least the heavens of Asaya of the 10 Sephiroth by examining the Qlippot of each one. So similarly, the concealers, that's kind of interesting because people think of Binah as kind of dark and murky and maybe mysterious, and so it might seem that concealing is of the same nature of Binah, but I don't think so. I think of Binah as ultimate revealing, ultimate exposure, walking into the all-encompassing void that we can only know as the abyss, looking up from the top of Chesed, but within which all creation unfolds. What's the opposite of that? The concealers. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know. That's an interesting one, because the hoodwink is a concealing of sorts, and it's generally not thought of as a Qlippothic thing. So, but it's Satariel. I haven't really investigated the linguistic origin there. So, I don't know how much help I can be for some of these, but at Agshekolot, the breakers in pieces is very interesting. Since Chesed, or Jupiter, is expansive and all-embracing and all-loving, its opposite seeming, is the breakers in pieces. Now, I don't know if this is mixing too many metaphors. At a certain point, things start to derail when you put too many examples together that don't quite line up. But in the Neophyte, when the Hyrus talks about unbalanced mercy as weakness and lack of will, I wonder if that is the same force that is referred to here as the breakers in pieces. And if so, does that unbalanced mercy, that over-permissiveness, Joe Shantz said it made him think of Altmont having Hell's Angels and it be the the bodyguards, or having them be the bouncers and the security and paying them in beer is just like that's what he thinks of when he thinks of unbalanced mercy in its Qlippothic aspect. So that's interesting. The burners, that's pretty straightforward. Too much severity will burn. Golahab. Tagiriron, yeah, I mean, some of these you just have to kind of memorize. Now, I used to always vibrate the divine name every time I would say these. I'm not quite as superstitious as I used to be, but the disputers definitely seems it rings true for poisonous or Qlippothic aspect of Tiphareth, which is attributed to the center of the soul, the heart, the solar plexus, and so when you have two people whose solar plexuses are, like two lions that are fighting and they're disputing, it's not that they're debating. It's not that they're trying to arrive at truth together or looking at the same thing from two different points of view. They're disputing. They're actively wanting to be right and prove the other wrong. So that's interesting. And we see that, I think, a lot, especially on the internet. The Ravens of Death, Garab Sarek. Now, some of these I think are in Harry Potter. Some of these were borrowed for. It sounds familiar, Garab Sarek. It sounds almost like something from Game of Thrones or Klingon. But the Ravens of Death, distributing things to the ends. I'm sure there's like stories and mythologies behind all of these that I just don't know about. Samael is interesting, of course, because he's been popularized by Hellboy. The Liar or Poison of God. He's also, of course, in the Zelator initiation, represented by the Hyrus at one point as the antithesis of Metatron in the sense of being evil. And then, of course, Sandalphon comes in as the reconciler between Metatron and Samael, and then takes the place at the opposite place of Metatron, so that the two angels on top of the ark are Keter and Malkut, and not divinity and evil. It's interesting. Gamaliel, the obscene ones. Now, that's the one, that when you have a kind of an uptight admin body that will get evoked, and you get accused of letting the Gamaliel run amok among you if you're telling dirty jokes and getting everyone laughing before the equinox ritual. Now, Lilith, that's probably the easiest one to remember, and the most offensive to anyone who has any kind of background in any kind of spirituality post-Victorian, Queen of Night and of Demons. That's interesting. I thought she was just the evil woman, but Queen of Night and of Demons. Did I add that? God damn it. So, yeah. She's like the anti... the anti-Sandalphon or the anti-Shekinah, the princess of the tree of evil, the ultimate manifestation in a body of the tree of evil in this symbolism here specifically, not in Lilith Parade or any other usage. Golahab or something?
Golahab for Gabora.
Oh, Golahab, yeah.
And then, so I'm going to memorize that. I'll probably think of Gabora and the Golahab. Things like that, and maybe, since that's for Mars, I could think of the burning of the tower for the burners. Like small things like that will fill my mind.
Or even just imagine Golahab, it's plural, the burners. And so if you imagine, what do we know of Geburah? Okay, well, we know Kamael. Kamael is supposed to have some kind of really impressive sword. He's the archangel of Geburah. And then Elohim Gibur, meaning the strength of God, the strength of Elohim. Okay, and then that's the divine name. And then the seraphim, who are the fiery angels, and they have their own order of angels in the more mainstream system. And then you get down into Mars and what we know about Mars post, syncretization with Ares, as he's the war god and all that. So then you get down into the levels of Qlippoth. So with all of those other things in mind, if you imagine a manifestation of the most Osaic version of all of that, and then imagine like a gang of 150 of them running around the streets, and not tempered by good. Maybe they've forgotten what divinity is. If anybody said, we're all one, they'd just laugh and spit at you. That's the Golahab, and they're probably running around with torches, setting things on fire. So that's pretty easy to remember. And then at the same time, then you reconnect with Elohim Gibor and the divine nature and say, okay, well, let's keep now that I've sort of evoked this by giving it a name and an identity and a picture in my mind, let's keep them, kind of under the divine guidance of this more pure form of that energy. And yet we can recognize it when we see it. Then when you see something in someone's eyes, you go, oh, that's the Golahab. The unrighteous rage, the desire to destroy just for no other reason than destroying, like a man who hits his wife just to assert dominance and get kicked out and put on the streets. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and by the image of it, you mean the sigil?
No, what I just painted with my description.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do a sigil, but I was much more, because you were saying you were thinking Gibora and the Golahab, and I was imagining a band. If you have Kamael out in front, and then the Golahab, the evil versions of some Messiah manifestation of Kamael or something. So you could do that with all of them, which gets really interesting, because what do you visualize for Chesed? Well, a bunch of serene, maybe fatherly, blue-wearing, loving angels. Now, okay, what's the Isaiah version of that? And then what's the evil version of the Isaiah version of that? And then it gets really interesting. Then you get into some really surreal, kind of Jodorowsky-esque places.
Mm-hmm. Quick question.
Yeah.
Because this is really helpful. So I've noticed, going through just a couple of grades that I've gone through, these charts that you're given, you do make use of them, in the further grades. So I don't know if you'd be allowed to how allude to on this or not, but so will I be working with this, or is this more on the Goetic Adeptus major level?
That's
do you
basically
like in NetSac, and say I get to 4-7 one day and become a philosophist, do I actually utilize this Qlippothic Tree?
No, only if you were in the order, maybe 15 years ago, then you could look forward to, working with some of these Qlippothic entities in the context of attack magic on ex-adepts. But probably in the order that you're in, you won't ever use them, at least not in a formal context.
Okay. So he may not test me as much whenever I do decide. But
it depends on the strictness of the test. I used to want people to at least know the English, maybe not the Hebrew names.
Sounds good. All right.
And then let's see, but the esoteric titles, I'm still looking for those, because those are more fun. Okay, here we go. Okay, so there's a few things that can immediately be pointed out about the esoteric titles. Like, for example, some of them have 2 titles, and some of them have 1. The ones that have 2 are the Emperor, the Lovers. Okay, so immediately we can tell that since the Emperor and the Hierophant are both referring to zodiacal signs, then there's no real solid pattern that can be discerned, because the Hierophant has 1 title and the Emperor has 2. So some of them have 1, some of them have 2. The ones that correspond to the 3 mother letters, the Fool, the Hanged Man, and Judgment, air, water, and fire, are all similar in that the Fool is the spirit of the ethers, the Hanged Man is spirit of the mighty waters, and Judgment is spirit of primal fire. So they're all 3 spirits, and there are no other titles that are called spirit that are not the mother letters. So then the only thing you need to remember is that instead of air, water, and fire, it's air, or rather it's ethers, and then the mighty waters, and then primal fire. So ethers, the mighty waters, primal fire, and then the spirit of, the spirit of, the spirit of. Now in here it says the only one that's the is for the Fool, and the other ones just say spirit of. I don't know how important that is, or if that's even intentional. Magician, Magus of power. there's a few other maguses. Let's just go over the maguses real quick. There's the Magus of Power. It's the only title for the magician. Magus of the Eternal Gods is the only title for the Hierophant. Magus of the Voice of Light is one of two titles for the Hermit. And that's it. So the three maguses. Magus of the Eternal Gods, you can think of the Hierophant as Osiris when he says, there is no part of me not of the gods. Osiris taking on the role of ruler of the gods. So in that specific context, the Hierophant is Magus of the Eternal Gods. Whereas the magician is the Magus of Power. So, I can define more clearly why the Hierophant is the Magus of the Eternal Gods than I can why the magician is the Magus of Power. Other than that, it seems self-explanatory. The Hermit, Magus of the Voice of Light. So, one interesting thing about the Voice of Light is Kal Or means... the Hebrew words kal or means voice of light, and the English word color means color. And if you consider the voice of the light, what is the voice of the light? Oh, well, I suppose that would be the color, wouldn't it? That's interesting. So there's a book written, The Key, I think it's called, by an Iraqi living in Canada, whose name I forget. And he compares a lot of these weird things and speculates that maybe there was a Jewish presence in England in the early days of the formation of the English language. Another example is that the word love in English most resembles lohev, which means love in Hebrew, and it doesn't resemble Licht or Amor, which are the two other places that it would have been deriving the word. So yeah, there does seem to be a bit of a Hebrew presence in England that we don't know about as much, that seems to have not been mentioned in the history books. Okay, where was I? Priestess of the Silver Star. Now that's interesting because Astrum Argentum, or I'm probably not saying that right, is the name of the order that Crowley founded, and he was clearly referencing the Priestess of the Silver Star, or the High Priestess path that connects directly from Tiferet to Keter, and may be one possible interpretation of the G symbol in the Masonic symbol. So Silver Star, Priestess of the Silver Star. That's just something to memorize. Like if you look at the High Priestess and you think, oh, hey, look, it's the Priestess of the Silver Star, then you're doing well. The Empress, daughter of the Mighty Ones. That's, well, you could think of Venus or Aphrodite having been born from the spittle, blood, or semen, depending on which version you read, of Zeus / Jupiter, daughter of the Mighty Ones. The Empress. There's probably more to that I'm not... yeah, she's, if you look at on the Tree of Life, at least on the Kircher, no, the other one. Yeah, Kircher. There's Keter, Chokmah, and Binah, and then Dalet, the path of the Empress, connects Chokmah with Binah, so she's kind of like at the bottom. She's the daughter of the supernals, so in that sense, the daughter of the Mighty Ones, maybe. The Emperor has two titles, Son, S-O-N, of the morning, so... okay. And chief among the mighty, which is sort of like that idea that's presented to us, in certain representations of King Arthur saying, oh, I'm not going to be your king who rules over you. We're all going to be sitting at this round table, and I'm chief among the mighty. So you could think of it that way, an emperor as chief among the mighty. And then son of the morning, S-O-N, you could think of, Jesus, son of God, or son of the morning. I don't know. There's something there. When the sun rises in a natural chart, i.e. on spring equinox, then you have Aries. You have the sun in Aries, rising in Aries. The Magus of the Eternal Gods, we already went over. The Lovers, children of the voice divine. So now there's a couple of voices. There's voice of light when we're talking about the hermit, and voice divine when we're talking about the lovers. So why is that? I don't know. But that's a good question. Children of the voice divine. And then oracles of the mighty gods. What I would say about oracles... Oh! Actually, there's something I could say about both of those. The lovers, one of the things I think in Theoricus you memorize that the tripod is the tool of the lovers, and the tripod is a reference to, among other things, the throne of the Pythia at Delphi, the oracle at Delphi, and she is an oracle, so oracle of the mighty gods, um, children of the voice divine. You could go there with it. They are the channels of Apollo, who had previously gone into the oracle when it was the oracle of Gaia, and killed Python, which was a big sin, and cut off the relationship between mankind and Gaia, the Titan who is the Earth. So it was kind of a big deal. And so the only person we could talk to since then is stupid Apollo, who did that. No, I don't. I'll edit that part out, or Kirini Ariadne will kill me. Okay, so the chariot, child of the powers of the waters. Okay, the chariot is the path that connects Binah with Gibura. Binah is the water, waters of creation, the ultimate, the top of the black pillar. So it's not surprising, child of the powers of the waters. Power is usually attributed to Gibura, so you have kind of that cardinal water of Cancer flowing from Binah down the path to Gibura, child of the powers of the waters. Lord of the triumph of light. Now, I just always think of the chariot, the guy standing there with the whole thing, the whole scene all around, and I think, Lord of the triumph of light. But beyond that, I mean, the question, what is the triumph of light and how does it relate to water? Oh, okay, well, life, duh. When the sun and water mix, we get rainbows and we also get life. So there's something. I don't know. The crawdad being a primal symbol of life. Strength, the daughter of the flaming sword. That's cool. And leader of the lion. Now, of course, in the strength card, usually the way it's depicted is you have the woman leading the lion, so that's easy. But daughter of the flaming sword is interesting because the flaming sword basically is two references. One, the path that leads from Keter to Malkuth, and two, the sword which separates the fallen Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. So the daughter of the flaming sword. I don't know. It's one of those things that I think they're meant to kind of snap the brain like a koan. The sound of one hand clapping isn't supposed to just have a simple answer like, yeah, so that's interesting. Daughter of the Flaming Sword. But there's the fire connection, fire sign, strength, Leo, and so on. The Hermit, Magus of the Voice of Light, we briefly mentioned. He is a magician, but specifically of the Voice of Light because he's a prophet. The Prophet of the Gods is his other title. So that's pretty self-explanatory, but, might take some repetition for memorizing, just making flashcards and whatnot. Wheel of Fortune, Lord of the Forces of Life. Anybody who's studied just the most rudimentary Buddhism will think of samsara, and that's easy to remember. Although Wheel of Fortune, well, anyway, yeah, no, that it works. That's enough. The Justice, daughter of the Lord of Truth, and holder of the balances. So the Lord of Truth, I don't know, my mind goes straight to Thoth. We usually think of Justice as being Ma'at, but in the book T Symbolism, she's the Titan Themis. So I'm not sure exactly what that's a reference to, but it seems to ring true. Daughter of the Lord of Truth. And then holder of the balances. She holds balances. Easy. Okay, we went over Hanged Man because it's one of the three mother letters. Death, child of the great Transformers. Transformers, more than meets the eye. That's pretty easy to remember if you grew up watching Transformers. The other one, Lord of the Gates of Death. That seems like sort of redundant. So that works. Just takes a little repetition. Temperance, daughter of the reconcilers. Oh, okay. Yeah. Who are the reconcilers? I don't know. Good question, but it makes sense that she's reconciling and she's a daughter of someone. The bringer forth of life. That's interesting. It's the path that connects Tiferet with Yesod. So it brings... Here, wait 1 sec. Hey, are you on a break? Cool. Hey, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
cool. I'll talk to you soon. Okay,
Okay,
bye.
bye. Thanks.
Okay, let's see. Where were we? Child of, okay, yeah, the devil. Okay, we were at temperance. The bringer forth of
Yes.
life. So, one thing you could think of is, um, if the whole tree of life is the goddess, uh, and Tiferet is the the Christ child, then in order to give birth, that Tiferet has to go down the path of temperance into Yesod. So, hence the bringer forth of life, bringing the Tiphareth energy down through into the world of form, into the world of formation, the world of Yetzirah, and ultimately down into manifestation into Asiya. So yeah, no, those are some of the things that come into mind for me for that one. And then the devil, Lord of the gates of matter. What are the gates of matter? The eyes.
The eye, okay. Almost like the perception of matter, in a
Yeah.
way. And then if the devil represents that, almost like it couldn't be like sexual force, but almost like that idea of materialism, then that would make sense in a way, you know, with the eyes being, the perception of matter and whatnot onto the
Yeah.
physical.
There's basically the it goes a little bit into the symbolism in the portal initiation, but one thing about the book T is the people below aren't bound, they're actually holding the chain. Um so the idea is that in order to enter into the world of matter, you have to do it through eyes, and that the gate between us and matter is our own eyes. And there's also a lot of symbolism about the nature of, in Christianity, the nature of sin. There's the whole thing about the blind man is without sin. And you can kind of bring in Hannibal Lecter talking about, the one who covets what he sees every day, that kind of thing. So the eye creates this illusion of distance and separation and obstruction. If something's around the corner, you can't see it, you don't know what it is. But if you weren't looking, if it weren't for that, uh, the grounding of your own sense of I am in a location by virtue of the senses, in this particular case, the eye, then there would not be anything outside of your reach. There wouldn't be anything far away or small. Um, so there's a lot in that, and it's temporary. So in order to get up to Tiferet, you've got to get past the idea of we're behind the eyes looking out, and in order to get down from Tiferet into the astral plane, you have to pick up the chain on that devil card and say, "Okay, I'm going to open some eyes and be separate from everything for a while."
Okay.
There's also the wings of the archangel of death are covered in eyes, so that's interesting. There's a lot there. Okay, so the Lord of the gates of matter, the Lord of the eyes, child of the forces of time. Boom! That's where my mind explodes, especially thinking there's this great documentary, this BBC documentary from the late 90s called Walking with Monsters. And, or even Neil deGrasse Tyson's new Cosmos, where he talks about the evolution of the eye and, how there were these, I think there were protozoa, and some of them were able to sense when there was more ultraviolet radiation, and they would swim away. They would like swim down away from when the sun was really bright, and then they'd come back up to the surface during the nighttime. And that was the beginning of all eyes in the world. And it was the product of billions of years, because the ones that couldn't tell would get burned up by the ultraviolet rays, and so the ones that survived ended up having the beginning of what we now know as eyes. So for me, they're the same: Lord of the gates of matter and child of the forces of time. Also, child of the forces of time. There's a lot. What is the child of forces of time? Well, what isn't? Anything we can think of that has form and that we can remember or look at or touch is the child of the forces of time. Even a rock is the child of the forces of time. There had to be a supernova at one point for there to be a rock. So that's a trip. Okay. The Tower. Lord of the host of the mighty. One thing about that is host is one of two translations of the Hebrew word Zabaot, which means armies or hosts. I don't know. It's like the only usage. It's the only time the word host means anything other than the guy at the party who shakes your hand and tells you where to sit. So it's a biblical thing. So Lord of the army of the mighty. So the Tower card, Lord of the army of the mighty. And by the mighty, we assume we're talking about God, but a particular aspect of God, it's being referred to by that particular adjective. At the beginning of the Thoth invocation, they call him the mighty and terrible one. Of course, it's an Egyptian invocation, so it's not talking necessarily about, the Judeo-Christian God or whatnot. At least not through the same filter. Okay, where were we? Lord of the host of the mighty. Might take some memorizing, but that's about it. The star, daughter of the firmament. Now, the thing with that, and they'll go into it more in the Philosophus invocation or the Philosophus initiation in the star card, but basically, the firmament is the space between the two ripples in the Aquarius sign. And the reason why Aquarius is fixed air is because it is the space between those two different waters. And the reason why it's the water bearer is because it's fixed air, because nothing else would be able to manage the water other than the man, the one who has the intelligence to make a bucket and utilize gravity to carry water. The waters above are the pure waters of creation. The waters below are the waters of creation in which creation is already unfolding and has been for a long time now, as far as we know. And so the being that dwells in the space of mind that has access to the waters above and the waters below is the star, the daughter of the firmament. The dweller between the waters. Again, same thing. The moon. Now, that's, of course, the moon card ruled by Pisces, as opposed to the high priestess ruled by the moon. Gets a little weird. Ruler of flux and reflux. All right. Okay. I don't know. It works. That's one of the things they talk about with the moon as well as with Pisces is its changeability. It flows back and forth. It waxes its wanes. The child of the sons of the mighty. Now, the thing I always like to point out about this is it's the only grandchild among the esoteric titles. And I think that might tie in to the fact that it's also the only path to have flex in the queen's scale, and then to look at the implications of what that means when the flex are generally thought of, at least as far as I know, as being the influence of chaos and Qlippot from below the tree of life, usually upon the tree in Asiya or Asaya. If you look at the princess scale tree of life, there's flex all over it. Even in Keter, it's white flecked with gold. And then when you get into the Prince tree, which is the level of the astral plane, plenty of them are rayed and flecked. But when you get up all the way up into the Queen scale, which is supposed to be the archetypal, the idea, the level of ideas, the first emanation from the divine of these forces, and for the moon card, that first emanation already had flex in it. So there was already an influence of chaos and the Qlippot in the Jungian Briatic archetypal concept of the moon card, which I think that says a lot. That and that it's the only grandchild among the cards. So in other words, it's created by us. So, go to the local theater and find out what's in it. horror movies are in it. A lot of stuff is in it, and of course when people are pathworking it, that's when we get into a lot of sometimes repressed memories and things like that. So it's basically, the way I describe it is that there's the front of the head and the back of the head. The front of the head is the conscious mind. It's where we're usually thinking of ourselves as being based. The back of the head, for a lot of people, is a mysterious and murky realm they don't like to get into, but for other people is kind of the place where they connect with their own subtler nature, and maybe even that part of us that we have in common with the rest of the world, with the rest of life. So there, based on those ideas, these traumatic events, which are sure to happen. I had this horrible dream the other day that there was a baby, and I put it down in a place that was kind of precarious, where I was like, uh-oh, what if he wakes up and rolls over? He'll fall off the edge of this. I better put him in a better place. But then I got distracted and didn't get around to it. And then later I came back and he had fallen off and his head was all bloody. And, I woke up and I was grateful that it was only a dream, but it, caused me to reflect on the definition of neurosis, which is when you have, you're a place where you're neglected. Either you don't get the right food, or there's pain, or there's, something, a problem, you're crying and nobody's answering. And these events start to cause us to be, feel like we're not loved. We're out of harmony. We start to get tics and involuntary, reactions and things like that, and then later buttons. And in our society, we take for granted that everybody has these, and it's just a matter of degree. Some people have a ton of them. I know I do. Somebody says the wrong word in the wrong tone of voice, and suddenly I'm in a bad mood, and nobody knows why. And I have to sit down and explain what happened when I was 4 years old that resulted in my reaction. So it's all that kind of stuff is in the moon card. Child of the Sons of the Mighty.
Did you look at the child in your dream? The baby is like your inner child in a way. Did you look at the dream, trying to analyze it from that perspective?
Yeah, actually, I'm pretty sure it was my left hamstring. Because what I've been doing, for one thing, there were two babies, and I'm pretty sure there were twins, and the other one was fine and in his crib. And so my left hamstring, I've been having a lot of, I injured it. I fell off my porch about a year ago, actually, now. And it's been a long process of getting better. And then sometimes I'll push myself a little too hard in an advanced yoga class, and I'll be down for the count, basically, and I'll have to call a sub for my own classes that I teach for a few days while I'm recovering. So it's just basically being mindful of it, because if I'm not thinking, I'll sit in a way that is the worst possible way I could be sitting for that part of my body. But if I'm more mindful as I go throughout my day, like a father needs to be mindful of whether or not his child is going to roll off of something and break his head. And the reason why I think that is because consistently in my classes, when we get to the point where we're working the hip flexors and hamstrings, I always talk about how they should comfort that part of their body and love that part of their body as if it were a baby. And I have them hold from their knee to the bottom of their foot and rock it slightly back and forth to loosen it, like they're rocking a baby or an animal, or anything to feel oxytocin and to generate love for a part of the body that normally just gets the brunt of all the worst of it. Basically, every time we get cut off on the freeway and we go, God damn it, or whatever, maybe that's just me. But the first thing that happens when that adrenaline rush comes is it goes right into the hip flexors and goes right into the hamstrings and there's a evolutionary reason for that. That's so we can run from the tiger. But unfortunately, it happens every time somebody looks at us funny, or somebody reminds us of a TV show in which the bad guy that we've learned, there's a lot of really kind of dumb reasons why we release these chemicals into our bodies that used to be for survival's sake.
Yeah.
And so I try to teach people to generate love for their own bodies, especially those really tender parts that where people have so many problems, because a lot of the low back issues are tied into the hips and hamstrings and all of that, because it's all connected. So that's in this society where everybody's sitting in cubicles. I put a lot of emphasis on that in my classes. So I think I created that symbol for my own self, and then I went and dreamt that I was neglecting one of these two babies, and so it was like, okay, like it was a dream to call attention to something.
Makes sense.
So let's see, we've got three more. The sun, Lord of the fire of the world. That doesn't take much explanation, I don't think. There's very little other fire that isn't the sun. Actually, that's not true. Someone was saying, or actually, it was on Star Talk. Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about how actually, like, if the sun, if the moon, or rather, if the Earth remains in its orbit around the sun, then in about 6 billion years, when the sun becomes a red giant, it'll be absorbed into the sun. But if we could somehow slingshot it out of orbit and at the same time tap into the energy at the core of the Earth, then we could probably have humans living on the Earth for another 10 to 15 billion years. I was like, what? So some cold Earth, flying interstellarly in between solar systems. The only thing we'd have to worry about is there's some really harsh cosmic rays out there between solar systems that the sun is actually protecting us from, all the way out to that layer of the little pieces of ice out there. Okay, so anyway, I'm getting far afield. Lord of the fire of the world. All right, so notwithstanding the fire at the center of the earth, yeah, Lord of the fire of the world. Judgment, the spirit of primal fire. We've already been over that one because it's one of the mother letters. Finally, the universe, the great one of the night of time. Now, that's another one that I wouldn't presume to say, here's what that means, the end, because a lot of these are meant to be thought of and meditated upon, and to be this, whole books worth of fiction could probably spring out of contemplating the meaning of the great one of the night of time. But just a few thoughts off the top of my head. It's the only great one. So, the universe maybe contains all the rest. And so that's maybe why it's the great one. The night of time. So why is it the night of time and not just of time? So that's a good question. From the Earth's point of view, we can only see the stars during the nighttime. So there's that. During the daytime, of course, we're overwhelmed by the sun, the Lord of the fire of the world. So maybe there's something there. Perhaps not. Maybe it's the Grim Reaper, or the Archangel of Binah, or Sandalphon, or a title for someone like that. I don't know. But that's pretty much what I've got as far as helping to memorize those things.
Okay, thanks. So a couple questions came up. So, what is the significance of memorizing this chart right here? Does this just help you with the tarot? Does it just help you get a little bit more familiar with the tarot? What's the point of memorizing these titles from like a practical sense? In the order for did they just make this a part of? Is this just something that, like, am I ever going to use this and apply this practically, or is it just to know that, hey, death is also known as the child of the great transformers?
It's more like as a Golden Dawn, like from a Golden Dawn centered point of view, death is the shorthand, or maybe even the exoteric for the masses name for the card whose real name is Child of the Great Transformers or Lord of the Gates of Death. So these are basically the actual names of the card. From, according to Mathers. And then these other titles were the shorter names, the more traditional names, although they did change world to universe, because even at that time, world, the meaning of the word world had changed to mean only the earth and not the stars or anything, where prior to that, world included everything.
My other question was, thinking back to when you were a practicus, and let's say you were preparing to move into your philosophist grade, you'd have to travel the path of pay and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
For the tower there, the whole tearing down of the old, what did you notice in your life? What was some of the internal alchemy going on within you that you noticed that kind of resembled that tower energy?
Well, just kind of a personal anecdote. When I got into Philosophus, I well, shortly after that, my mom died, so I could say that was a huge change. Also, I was taking a lot of acid, and so I was kind of going back and forth between working the moon card and working the star card. So I would do like, I would regress myself all the way back using the ritual to go back in time until I experienced my primal scream, for instance. And then on the other hand, going out in the middle of the night, watching the dew appear on the blades of grass, looking up at Sirius on acid and feeling like, Adam being created in the Garden of Eden. So I was working a lot with those two paths and not as much with the tower card. And then my house caught on fire. So, what ended up happening? Yeah. But there were some people that were saying, if you had worked the tower card, then this wouldn't have happened. And I don't know if there's truth in that, but the idea being that, that when it's time to go through these things, you go through it whether you want to or not. But if you catch it on the astral plane, you might be able to go through it without it having to manifest so severely. So what might have happened, for example, if I had pathworked the tower card in an alternate universe, if I had pathworked the tower card as much as I was pathworking the moon card and the star card, I might have grown a spine and told these idiots in my house to get out, and said, stop freeloading and and kind of kept a better eye on things. My big mistake was that at the Temple of Isis at the time, they had a practice where they kept doing little changes. Like they at one point in the East, they made the curtain white instead of black. So I did that here at the Sanctuary of Hermanubis, which is the room I'm actually sitting in right now. They rebuilt it after the fire. And then at one point they switched. They had taper candles on all the side altars instead of glass candles. So I did the same thing. And then at one point they started doing a vigil where they'd leave them burning 24/7. So I started doing the same thing. The only problem is I had this broken window that Big Dog, one of the freeloading roommates, had leaned against from the outside and broken. And so the wind blew through, caught the western curtain, and blew it right up to the flame of that little taper candle in the west and almost burned the whole house down. By the time I woke up and came in here, 3 of the walls were burning, and I tried to put them out with my red bathrobe. So I'm standing here naked with a red bathrobe. Apparently my shoulder was on fire. And so I got rushed to... there was some kind of piece of burning cloth that landed on my shoulder and kind of fused with it. So I got rushed to the hospital after that. And Philosophus was pretty long for me. So it spanned, basically there was the beginning of Philosophus. I said, you know what? The order's fucked. They snuck out and stole my teacher's journal and went to Kinko's and copied it and then passed it around at a secret meeting that he wasn't invited to in order to discuss the work he was doing that he was writing about in his personal journal. And then he ended up being so outraged that he left. And I held him while he cried at one point. So I was basically like, I don't want to be stuck in Practicus for the rest of my life. So initiate me into Philosophus and I'm getting the fuck out of this place. And so that's what I did. And then, then I started focusing on drama. I directed the Glass Menagerie, and then got into music, and we started a band called Fall from Eden. Then, meanwhile, my mom was still active in the order. She started hanging out with a girl who was a neophyte, who was kind of a runaway and, a bad girl. She introduced the two of us. We hooked up. I started going out to the temple again, and then my mom died. So there I am at the temple. I'm like, yeah, this place is fucked. I've got these poor people from Austin coming up to me saying, this place is fucked and he's a liar and everything's wrong and this is the worst possible thing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I know. And they're like, then what are you doing here? I'm like, well, I don't know. I'm hoping to change it for the better. This is
Yeah.
me 17 years ago. And so anyway, so this is Philosophus. And then the house burned down. And so then I moved in with Gordon, the old beatnik who passed away a couple of years ago. And kind of like settled down, and I was on painkillers and smoking a lot of weed, and I started painting and hiking, and at around that time I went up to Portal. So my whole Philosophus journey was a tower card experience. I definitely, at the beginning of Philosophus, I had a mother, I had a house, and at the end of Philosophus I had a burned out house and no mother. It's like, talk about a tower card experience, more of an edible tower card experience.
Yeah, definitely. This one's more like personal since
Yeah.
you answered a lot of my questions. So, thinking back to EOGD when you were involved, and then say you had fratters and sorors that were making it to the great and bad Adeptus Minor and whatnot, going past the veil in a way, and it's supposed to be once you hit the sphere of Tiphareth that you're in touch with. Is it some aspect of your higher genius, your higher self? Do you learn your angel's name at that point? It is said. How basically my question is it your belief that that all the alchemy going through these grades, these outer order grades, and once you get to that point, are you in touch with your higher self to an extent, or are there people that you've seen going through the grades and they don't develop that alchemy and they're not in touch with that higher genius?
I think we all go through it there's the only thing that the experience has in common for everybody is the particulars of the ritual and the experience. And so, yeah, like you said, there's some people who go through the ceremony and it doesn't seem to have done anything. But it's hard to say. Especially the way that they did it in EOGD, where you spend 36 hours or a minimum of 21 hours locked in a box, and you're allowed to take bathroom breaks. But basically, you can't help but do a little bit of contemplation while you're in there. And then, so you haven't seen light in so long that by the time you see light, and then you're looking at the colorful vault, it has an effect. As far as the higher genius and the holy guardian angel, now I don't know if you've heard some of the recent interviews, like with Scarlet Magdalene and the Abramelin work. I think that I always thought of the contacting the holy guardian angel, the knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel in 5 = 6 as a thalamic thing. That in Thelema they talk about how, well, in the beginning Crowley went through the outer order, the Golden Dawn, and we got to 5 = 6, had knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. Blah. Okay, well, that's news to me, because we don't really, the Osirification of Ani isn't necessarily the same thing as calling on, a guardian angel, in the sense of It's a Wonderful Life, and he's going to show you what the world would be like without you in it, and then Zuzu gets her petals back and whatever. But it seems like the Abramelin work is trying to call on a separate being that has been assigned to you by some hierarchy, and I honestly don't buy any of that. The higher self that you quote unquote get back in touch with was never apart from you. When I use the phrase higher self, which I don't, but when I think of the phrase higher self, I think of the higher chakras, which blend very, in a very blurry line with the lower chakras, where in Puritanism, i.e. Golden Dawn, they think of mankind as being in a fallen state, far, far, far from his perfection, which is in the image of Christ, which could never be Christ, which could only imitate Christ, and blah, blah, blah. They put as many separate, ring past knots between mankind as God as they can in order to sell tickets. And, a lot of people do that. A lot of systems do that, and the Golden Dawn is one of them. So that all being said, what was the question? Shit, I got sidetracked.
No, no worries. I was just wondering, do you believe that,
Oh yeah, the higher genius.
yeah,
So
do you believe a lot of these guys that, or fratres and sorors, do you believe that, once they hit the grade of Adeptus Minor
it's
and
like I
could
said,
evolve, do you believe they're in touch with their HGA?
no, it's not that. It's that they never weren't. Joe Shan's put it well in relating it to the ruby slippers that Dorothy had on all along. And I've referred to the Golden Dawn as the cure for Christianity. If you were born, in a rational, sane environment where like for example, if you were Neil deGrasse Tyson's kid, then you'd be going 5 steps back to join the Golden Dawn. But if you have enough of a Christian upbringing that you have hang-ups about it and you feel like you're separate from God and the word God makes you uncomfortable and you think that Jesus might be watching you masturbate and there's all these weird tics and neuroses that come from indoctrination into Judeo-Christianity, then the Golden Dawn can help cure you of that. And by the time you've gone through the process of the quote-unquote alchemy and you get to 5 = 6 and you have someone whipping you and tying you to a cross and then they say you are now one with the body of Christ and they put a knife on your palm with some wine on your forehead and it's this thing and there's incense and you're holding a rose cross and the thorns are digging into your hand,
Yeah.
then you finally maybe you can admit maybe I am God, but like if you had been a Hindu, then you wouldn't have had to go through all that, so I mean, I think that it's a good system to deprogram one from thinking that they're separate from God, but it unfortunately also serves to reprogram people into this new thing that is very limited and hierarchical and so I mean it's a very like if someone's goal is to awaken to their true and innermost self, then I would say meditation is for you. But if they're like, yeah, but I really like doing things the hard way and I have a strong affinity for London in Victorian times, then I'd say, well, if you want to take 20 years doing it, and have a lot of weird side journeys along the way, then maybe the Golden Dawn is for you. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Makes sense.
So I mean, Paul Foster Case is an example of someone who when you read his poetry, he clearly is grokking the oneness of it all. What he also has in addition to that is he's been imprinted with all of the symbolism of the Golden Dawn. So he's speaking in a language that's very familiar to other people that are indoctrinated into those symbols. And also, he's got a little bit of I know and you don't, kind of this is enlightenment, I'm enlightenment and you're not. Yeah, but only subtly, in it. But so I think that he grew up in a time and place where it was considered blasphemous or taboo to admit that there's anything divine about you being a scummy human, and then he was able to separate from that society and work with the Golden Dawn system until he was able to awaken to the fact that he never wasn't in touch with his higher self. I think that people who choose to do wrong things, more or less intentionally, are creating a separation within themselves, and that's where it starts to seem accurate when they talk about people being separated from their true selves. But it's an assumption, and it's an assumption that's made by a lot of religions that, clearly if you've walked into the door, then you're separate from your higher self, and that's an assumption the Golden Dawn makes as well. And so they tell you, enough times that you're separate from your higher self that you start to believe it, and then you start to want to climb the ladder that they provide you to get back in touch with your higher self. But it's just a cheap trick. Like Alan Watts said, it's picking your pocket and selling you your own watch.
That's really interesting. Would it be better to say that almost like the higher self is basically that part of you, the deepest part of you, the deepest part of your soul? Would you say it's pretty much the shaman part, in a way? Because I know all of this stuff relates to the Nefesh, the Ruach, and the Neshama, right?
Yeah,
At the core, right? And I'd imagine that's what you're taught in deeper levels of adulthood. in the genes.
Maybe, it depends on your teacher, and where they got it. But basically, I'd say that the higher self in this context is the deepest self, yes, but also the most shallow. There's a saying in Zen that it's called the great void, not because it's empty, because it's teeming with life, that flowers that are being created and destroyed at all times and in all places. And so similarly, uh, I like the phrase true self rather than higher self, because it just eliminates all of that. Because higher self, you're looking up at clouds, or you're trying to figure out if it's in your third eye or in your crown. But true self, I mean, it's silly, to look up. You automatically start looking within your solar plexus, or you feel it in your heart, or you feel it in your mind, or you feel it in your whole body. And so it includes all these other layers, like as if there were a bunch of veils underwater, and the higher self is the water, and so what happens is this higher self, this true self, is looking at the veils for so long that it sees past the first one and past the second one and past the third one, and then it's seeing all five, and it's seeing the interplay between the five, and it gets so absorbed in the complexity that. And what I mean by this is, you're born as a baby, and then eventually you realize you have hands that you can control, that there's these other hands, mommy and daddy's hands, and you can't control those. And then eventually they hold a mirror up in front of you and they say, this is you. And at that point, the higher self has gotten so totally confused that it thinks it's the veils. And then it thinks it needs to climb its way back out into a space of emptiness in order to find itself, which might help. But ultimately, it doesn't need to in order to find itself, because it was never lost.
Okay, I see what you mean. I've heard you in the past say that the Golden Dawn is like missing. If they were to incorporate some forms of yoga, maybe get more deep in meditation,
it might help.
Definitely would help. Do you think Crowley, in his AA order, him incorporating various forms of yoga, do you think he was in the right doing that?
I don't know enough about the AA to know exactly where or how he incorporated that stuff. I know that when they talk about left-hand path, a lot of that was defined by the work that he did. But he was drawing from the actual left-hand path that he would have learned about from Alan Bennett, which comes from the East, comes from certain sub, practices within Vajrayana Buddhism. So I wouldn't necessarily say right or wrong. It is what it is and was what it was. And one thing that it'll do is people who, discover the works of Crowley and work through that will gain what there is to be gained, and maybe run into whatever problems there are to be found within that system. But I really honestly don't know the system at all well enough to know how or in what ways he brought in yoga. But yeah, I don't know if it's that the Golden Dawn needs to be changed or updated, or, I mean, from my point of view, there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's part of a greater educational experience, which maybe also includes going through, various rites of initiation into, some kind of traditional Sufi system, and also, the Sikh order, and also, a few other things. In other words, if there was like if I were to build a college, if I were to build like a graduate school type, you've already learned your general ed, you've already learned all the normal stuff that you should know to be able to get along in the world. Because one thing that happens when you, like me, start too young is you end up specializing in this, and then when anybody brings up anything about anything useful in the world, you're like, I don't know, I'm not familiar with that, but I can talk to you all day about the relationship between astrology and other things that are made up. But anyway, what was I saying? Shit. Yeah, no, the Golden Dawn is the Golden Dawn. Sometimes when like I've observed, when people come from a Christian background and they want to be magicians, they want to be bad, they want to be powerful, they want to find some way that they can do that without offending their own inner grandmother. You know, I mean, then this is kind of a lot like my path. This resembles me. You know, I wanted the ultimate powerful thing that also I could, you know, say, well, it's a Christian thing, you know, ultimately. Um, and it appeals to people who are coming from there. Uh, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, it was temporary. For me, like eventually, it was. I mean, I can't. I was talking to someone yesterday about this, and you know, I was saying that the Golden Dawn is kind of obsolete and limited, and the hierarchical structure of it makes it, you know, kind of undesirable in a lot of ways, and the fact that it's supposed to be a spiritual system and it starts with putting a hoodwink on and putting a sword on your neck is, you know, it's like that's right where the problems begin, you know. And then he was saying, you know, I really. It you know, it pains me to hear that clearly your experience with has tainted your ability to appreciate the beauty of the Golden Dawn system. And I replied, please don't disregard this as emotionalism. The Golden Dawn system is limited. Like, I'm, you know, yeah, so it's like
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a point, and people can't see beyond. Oh, you poor thing, you went through all this stuff that clearly has made you not able to see how great the Golden Dawn system is. And it's like, that's fine that people exist that really want to parade it around as the greatest thing. Um, it has a historical relevance. It had a huge impact on a lot of things, and so I think it's good to know about in order to be able to see kind of behind the veils of those things, being, for example, Thelema, Scientology, Wicca, and you know, the poetry of W.B. Yeats, you know, and a few other things that start to become more clear once you've started practicing the Golden Dawn system. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seems like when it's carried out to its most, like if you do nothing but Golden Dawn,
Yeah.
you end up having a blog. I don't know, you know, writing some books about Golden Dawn, and
Do you think for yourself, so you've been in like say 22 years or whatever, do you think you just hit that pinnacle of the Golden Dawn curriculum to where it's like it's worked its magic out for you and you've taken it at what it was and almost like it's only been developed, I guess, so far, like not necessarily, not, don't call it like grade wise or anything like that, but just like, just everything that the inner order is, because it represents a set of teachings at like a point of time, right? So do you think it's just they're kind of like lacking, you know, more of the Eastern stuff that you get a lot out of in a way? Do you just think that you've gone through the curriculum and you've taken it at what it is at this point, but now you're able to see what it's lacking in a way?
yeah, it's the thing is, like I was saying earlier, yeah, there was that point where I was saying if I were to do a Golden Dawn thing, I'd throw in some yoga, but I'm not thinking, I mean, right now I'm not thinking if I were to fix it or if I were to turn it into something more like what I would like, I wouldn't necessarily take Golden Dawn, it wouldn't be Golden Dawn plus, I would take out most of it. Um, you know, like I said, if someone wants to go through a neophyte initiation and have a sword put on their neck and have someone threaten their life with wine, that's fine as a historical experience, as a historical creative anachronism experience. Like if you go to the Renaissance fair, you do some Renaissance fair shit. If you go to a Victorian fair, maybe you go through a neophyte initiation. But as far as something that's going to be universally applicable and useful for humanity, you know, I don't think it's the Golden Dawn. When I was a kid, I used to think that if only everyone in the world went through Golden Dawn initiation, then we'd all be fine. But now I realize not only is it not for everyone, I don't think it's even for the people that I thought it was for before. I've seen more
Okay.
harm done than good. Uh, and but you know, I mean, there's always exceptions. You know, I kind of go back and forth about it. But I mean, it seems like the most good comes from when people leave the system. Um, but the way it's written is it's supposed to be for life. So in order to, and now my old teacher Gordon would say, "Oh, he graduated when somebody leaves the second order. You're supposed to be in for life." And then the way they made it in the EOGD was even more severe than that, or you know, is just very strict commitments, very specific and strict commitments. There were a bunch of canons you had to adhere to, and all these other things.
Do you think with, you
That's
know,
not useful to me. I don't think that's. I mean, that's as useful as becoming a priest, which maybe is useful. And there's some people that you know need priests, and so if there's to be Golden Dawn initiations, then there's gonna have to be people that go through the 5 = 6 and commit themselves to that. And so, but I mean, it's got to be a matter of desire to do it or personal preference, or and then even for the people doing it, they're going to have days where they're doing it out of obligation and not out of a sense of love for it. And I don't know, it just seems to me like something that was really useful in the late 1800s.
this one's just for you, more in the realms of magic and synchronicity. So I don't think you're actually given like real magic, say in the outer order per se, as much as this
That's what they
stuff
say.
is right. As much as this stuff is mainly just ritual work for working with the subconscious and almost like tricking your subconscious into making things happen in the world is more of like a way I kind of see it. But that's just my view at this point. But so I'm seeing things manifest in terms of like synchronicity, right? So I may do a ritual and see like subtle signs, just like how it would appear in the world. And so I'm wondering, in terms of where you've gotten on your path, and say you as an adept, is it pretty much to the point to where you could will things into the world, almost like because you're more in tune with like deeper parts of yourself? Can you just pretty much think something into existence in a way?
No, I don't
Is
know.
it?
I know more than I could before, I don't think. I mean, I think that it's for me it's being being able to adjust my they talk about the lower will and the higher will. Expectation is another word that might apply here. So like for example, um when people say, oh, it didn't live up to my expectations, does that mean that they're a bad magician, or that they're unable to accept the world as it is? And I mean, it's like the the relationship between kind of the separate self and the all self, the one and the many. We're co-creators with God, basically. So what that means is, if you're working with the flow of the unfolding of God in creation, then it's a lot easier to it's a lot easier. Now I'm trying to think. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked because I'm thinking that there's a good metaphor, and it's an unfortunate metaphor, but it works with this system, since the system is hierarchical and a lot of the terminology is as well. So if you work at a company, and the company has a particular agenda, and between the board of trustees and the CEO, everybody's on board with that agenda. So they hire you and you're working there. So let's say that that's what it's like. If you want power, then you will go along with the agenda, because then they'll give you that power. That because if you're going to do what they want done anyway, then they'll want to give you some employees to boss around and some more power, right?
Okay.
But if you're going to go against, if you're going to be like talking in the corridors against what the status quo thinks is the direction everything ought to go, then they're gonna take away your power and find reasons to fire you, or at least put you in a position where you can't do much, where you're ineffective. Okay, so that sounds like kind of a gross situation. But let's say the company is the universe, the CEO is God, and the company's mission is good, right? Then as a then you'd want to do what the company does, be like the company, and be charitable and loving and all of these things, and then the company will increase your power. And then and it's basically like shooting yourself in the foot if you're going to use your magic to hurt someone, because you're really just hurting yourself.
Yeah, did Dr. Robert Word get back to you?
No, but I don't know if he said not now. Yeah, well, he said later. And then he started forwarding me weird Norse memes. But what's his name in the Enochian? Oh, that was, that I think that was part that might have been cut out. There was like a 5 minutes of the conversation with the guy that did the Enochian software that ended up getting dropped, and I think that was when we were talking about Robert Word. But
does he know?
Yeah, what happened was I didn't get exactly all the details because he has a thick accent and I didn't quite understand. But he being Jurgen, was doing something, and then Robert Word contacted him and said, you're revealing the secrets of Enoch.
Yeah.
Do you remember that part?
No. I didn't get to listen to that episode, but I know how Word would be. Not that I know him personally, but he definitely seems more like hush hush about things.
Well, but the irony is he hadn't revealed anything yet. He hadn't said anything about Enochian. He didn't even know what Enochian was. And so it wasn't until Robert Word said that he said, wait, what? And so then Robert Word started working with him and pointing him in certain directions, and that's when he started making the Enochian software. So Robert Word ended up doing the opposite of that by acting like he was, oh, well, you shouldn't reveal that. He's like, reveal what? Oh, this and this and this and this and this. So now he's...
Yeah, I'd really love to get him on, and I'd love for you to pick his brain, man, because I heard this guy's fourth succession from Mathers. I was thinking, wow, it's quite the title,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, like the direct fourth successor from Mathers from back then. I also know he's a Mason. I know you interview a lot of Masons on your podcast, but I'd love for him to jump on. I don't know if he's just like afraid that he may spout something, or that you may ask him, certain questions that he may have to go past his, the obligations and whatnot of the grades. But man, I'd love for you to get him on there. I'd love for him to reach out.
I'll send him a note.
Cool. All right. Cool. I don't have any more questions, but I sent you just a little bit, just for your time. And let me know if you got it. I sent it to PayPal.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll talk soon, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
No problem. Bye-bye. Thank you, Anonymous, for interviewing me on my podcast today. Also, thank you for creating a world in which ex-Scientologists can feel free to speak out their experience without retaliation. Thank you for your part in the Arab Spring, for saving WikiLeaks, and for making Visa and MasterCard shit themselves just for our amusement. Thank you as always to Susuma Ueda, to Camille and Kennerly, and to you. Until next time. Good night.